Aerospace industry released its final report yesterday. Several members of the group spoke at a news conference about their findings. The Commission's chairman, Robert Walker, led this hour and 5-minute event.
Over the last year, the Commission on the Future of the U.S. Aerospace Industry has had an opportunity to look in depth at aerospace. Nearly all of the reports that have been done in this area, as a matter of fact, we think all of the reports that have been done in this area previously have looked at air and or space, but not the total topic of aerospace. And so in this report, you have a look at kind of the totality of the industry. What we found as we looked at this is that there have been systemic failures over the years, and that our nation and the aerospace sector face great economic challenges as a result of those failures. The Commission today issues an urgent call for action for the public and for lawmakers to understand the importance of the industry and to understand that the crisis that we now face is real. For too often, we believe that Americans have taken aerospace leadership for granted. We can no longer do that. The challenges that are in the global economy for this industry are things that we need to meet head on. The Commission report is designed to give that kind of plan of action for government, for industry, and for the public at large. And what I'm going to do is walk you through various aspects of the report so that you can get some idea as to what the Commission recommends for the future. First of all, what we did was we decided that we would look at aerospace as a total subject. Now that's important because in the future, during the next several decades, you are going to have air and space vehicles operating, for instance, in the same environment. You are going to have lots of things happen that have a total aerospace context to them, and there are core competencies that we have to have as a nation in order to see to it that all the things we want to have happen appropriately. And so what you'll see in this report is us addressing the question of core competencies. We began with a sense of vision about what we thought the next century could bring. We believe that people in the next century should see aerospace as something where anyone, anything can go anywhere at any time. And that's what we use as a framework in which to try to address how you got to that point. We did so by saying that we think that in the end that the U.S. has to boldly pioneer new frontiers in technology, commerce, and exploration. The anyone, anything, anywhere, anytime theme is both a military theme and a commercial theme. It's the movement of goods, it's a movement of munitions, it's the movement of troops, it's the movement of business people. It's the idea that in aerospace, we need to have that capability as we look into the future. In Chapter 2, the next recommendation that we give is to exploit the advantage of mobility. And we look at that in a couple of different ways. First of all, we look at the airline crisis that we presently face and talk about the fact that we need to step up as a nation and deal with that crisis. But the main part of our report in this area looks at the need to upgrade our air traffic management capabilities. If, in fact, we are going to do all the things that we want to do in the upcoming several decades, air traffic management has to be far more robust and far more automated than it is at the present time. And so in this report, you will see a plan for interagency activity that will give us the capability to do new air traffic management. We look at the things that the Defense Department is going to do with regard to its mission that requires new control, navigation, and surveillance capabilities, and we suggest that they need to be working with the Department of Transportation, with the FAA, with NASA, with NOAA, with a lot of these agencies to interconnect all of the pieces that are now under development for a variety of missions to see to it that in the end we get a very robust air traffic management program. We also suggest that we need to streamline our airport and runway development and provide this nation with the infrastructure that's needed for all kinds of new applications that range from space vehicles to the concept of air taxis, where you might have thousands more planes added to the mix of aircraft flying as they carry businessmen in regional areas. The next chapter, Chapter 3, we deal with the space issue, and we say that it has special significance because we believe that there are new opportunities to be opened here, but we also think that we need to focus less on exactly where we want to go in space and more on the things that will allow us to exercise a number of options in the future. We say in the report, for example, that we think propulsion and power are two of the things that NASA ought to concentrate on in the years ahead. We believe that because we think that you create an imperative by creating the technologies that allow you to do new things. For example, if you want to go to Mars, it is far more of an imperative if you can go there in a few weeks than if it takes you a couple of years. And so we believe that that kind of development is the right way to go in the space program. Chapter 4, we deal with the national security aspects. And there we are looking at the ways in which we can do new procurement programs in defense that allow for a healthier industry. But we also are very concerned about the industrial base of the country. We believe that if we are to maintain the edge that we have in aerospace, in national defense, we do have to maintain a healthy industry. And we look a lot at the maintenance of that industrial base inside the chapter on national security. In Chapter 5, we look at the reforms that are necessary inside government to assure that we have a new form of decision-making. One of the conclusions that this commission came to in the course of our work was that part of the systemic failures in aerospace stem from a government that makes all of its decisions inside of vertical boxes, vertical stovepipes, and not enough horizontal decision-making among agencies and among programs. And that in the future, if we're going to utilize the resources properly, we have to have vastly more in the way of horizontal decision-making inside government. This recommendation, this chapter, talks about how you could put together that kind of a horizontal decision-making process. The next chapter, Chapter 6, deals with the global market issue. There we found a need for substantial reform of the way in which we now do export controls. And you will find in that chapter a considerable discussion of how we change our regulations and change, in some ways, our attitudes about how to function in a global environment. If we are to provide leadership in aerospace in a global industry, we have to be able to have the kind of interaction among nations that allows our products to be fully competitive. And this chapter deals very meaningfully, we think, with that particular subject matter. The next chapter, Chapter 7, deals with the new business model that's needed. We feel as though there are many places where business needs to have a better relationship with government and has to have more understanding on the part of government of what its needs are. And so there are tax policies, there are appropriations policies, there are a number of things that need to be put into a new business model that is discussed in Chapter 7. In Chapter 8, we deal with the workforce issues. We are very concerned that the aging of the workforce in the very near term could deprive us of a great deal of talent and capability in the industry, and that there is no replacement stream of people coming along that will fill that workforce pipeline. That gives us a great concern. We talk about that in the chapter. We consider this to be a real challenge. Beyond that, though, we recognize that in order to have the kind of workforce we want in the future, that we have to have considerable improvements in the educational process. And so we talk about educational reform, and we talk about the need for interagency cooperation to give us educational programs that meet the needs of an aerospace workforce. And then finally, in Chapter 9, we deal with the question of the research base that is needed to sustain aerospace. The one thing we know from the historic performance of this industry is that without a robust research base, that this industry simply cannot move forward. And so we talk about the need for increased investment in basic research, and then we call upon the industry to take a leading role in applying that research to actual products. That's a run-through of where we are. We'll be glad to take questions here in a few minutes. The first thing I want to do before moving, though, to your questions is allow my Vice Chairman, Whit Peters, to say a few words. I will say this about the work of this commission. It was very much of an interactive kind of participation. The commissioners contributed in meaningful ways. Some of us were appointed by the President, some of us were appointed by the Congress. Some of us were Republicans, some of us were Democrats, and so on. But we worked together in order to achieve the consensus that's in this report. This report was adopted unanimously. We had a great diversity of viewpoints. Some of you who came to our public sessions heard us discussing things openly where we didn't agree. And the fact that this is a consensus report, I think, speaks a great deal. It speaks to the fact that it was bipartisan, and in terms of the congressional appointees and administration appointees, it was somewhat bipolar. Whit was a congressional appointee. I'm a presidential appointee. We work great together, and I want him to say a couple of words.
Thanks, Bob. Well, this was a terrific commission to be on. As Bob has indicated, the report is very far-reaching in many areas. From a national security perspective, I'd like to just talk about a couple of things this afternoon very quickly. And one is, we really have here a call to action. I think that the situation in our industrial base is one which is fine for the moment, but we know that it is going down. In the Air Force, they used to say, you know, as long as your nose is pointed down, you're going to hit the earth at some point, and that's not a good thing. And the industry's nose is pointed down, and we need to start thinking about how we're going to make it come back up. As Bob said, we have an immediate problem in this country with the age of the aerospace workforce because people are about to retire, and that's both inside government and outside government in the defense industry. And with them will go an enormous amount of know-how and technical competence. We throw around statistics like that there are twice as many people over 60 than under the age of 30 at NASA. That is not unusual for Air Force laboratories, for other technical and scientific organizations. And obviously, we're going to need to have a new generation of young men and women to be able to take over these roles. And that raises a number of issues that we talk about in the report. One is the basic competence of the American society today in mathematics and scientific education, and whether our school system is producing the kinds of people we need. And the other is the question of why would anyone come to work in aerospace today when it's a cyclical industry with reduced research and development, and in many instances a persistent view in colleges and universities that there's not much interesting to do in aerospace. So those are the kinds of issues we have dealt with. We've also tried to deal with a very fundamental issue, which is what do we do with some core competencies like solid rocket booster motors, where we are going to build the last one we're going to build for a while in the next few years, and we don't have another program for 15 or 20 years. How do we sustain those competencies over a period of time? I think Bob has done a terrific job in focusing the Commission really on what is perhaps the most difficult issue we face, and that is how to get the federal government's role unified across the executive and legislative branches so that we have programs which provide all of the core competencies we need, both in the civilian aviation side and the military side. Many of these core competencies converge, and they need to converge because we need to have the convergence of supply, demand, foreign participation. All of these things require a holistic approach, one which we don't have today. So if there's any takeaway from this report, it seems to me, first of all, that there is a need for urgent action. And second, there is a need for a unified federal program in aviation, one that will coordinate what the executive branch agencies are doing, and will find a way to get Congress to review that in a coordinated way so that we don't have the various dislocations we have today. So with that, Bob, thank you, and thank you for letting me be the Vice Chairman.
Well, Thank you very much, Whit. Let me introduce the other commissioners who are here with us today, and when we open up to questions, you're free to ask questions of any or all of us. To my right, I always start on my right, Heidi Woods, Bob Stevens, Tilly Fowler, Ed Bolin, Buzz Aldrin, John Douglas, and Neil Tyson. And all of us are available to answer your questions. I'm told that it is important that you wait to ask your question until someone shows up over here with a microphone so that people who are listening in over the telephone can hear the questions as well as the answers. So fire away.
Chairman, you brief the Vice President tomorrow. Once he has fully apprised of your report, what do you expect him to do with it?
That is something I probably should have mentioned. We are, in fact, going to meet with the Vice President tomorrow morning in the Roosevelt Room. He is going to accept the report on behalf of the administration. We expect this administration to respond very favorably to the report. We have had an ongoing dialogue with them throughout our work. And have had a very positive reaction from several of the agencies. For example, on the air traffic management side, the Department of Transportation has indicated that they are prepared to work with us, and they think our recommendations will be very helpful to them moving forward in a new pattern in that area. NASA, in their most recent budget amendment, has indicated a direction of moving toward more in the way of propulsion research, and we think that that will probably be reflected also in what they are going to do in their 2004 budget submission. We have worked with the White House on a number of issues and believe that this administration, through the White House, through the Department of Commerce, and through the Department of State, is in fact working on export control reform. And so there are a number of places that we have worked in the report where we think we're going to have a very positive feedback from this administration. And I think that the fact that the Vice President has decided that he's going to be the one to accept the report on behalf of the administration is a testament to the fact that they do believe that the things that we have done here are a way forward for many of their agencies.
Yes, I'm Dave Montgomery with the Fort Worth Star Telegram. What kind of impact would these recommendations, if they were carried out in full, what kind of impact would they have on the nation's biggest airports like Dallas-Fort Worth or LAX? Would these airports change dramatically? Would they become obsolete? Would they, what kind of impact would they have?
Well, from my standpoint, I believe that what we would do is free up a lot of their resources to be used in far more reasonable and responsible pattern. By that I mean by allowing them to build new runways and get that done quicker, we can in fact manage more of the increased air traffic in the future. We think that will be a positive for those airports. We also believe that many of the things that we have in here in terms of our business model will help make the airlines ultimately healthier. And that would be a positive thing for the major airports, because one of their real problems right now is just the overall economic health of the airline industry. But there are a couple of people here who have worked on this, and let me turn to them who brought some real expertise into this. Ed Bolin.
Well, I would agree that the hope would be that the major hub airports would have more flexibility to construct new runways. I think those of us that spend a lot of time looking at it have found that of all the things we can do to enhance the capacity of our air transportation system, building new runways is probably the most effective. So we would hope that at some of the nation's biggest and most important airports that new runway construction would be available. We would also hope that by increasing the way we utilize airspace, by making ourselves able to take advantage of different types of aircraft, that we would be able to better utilize the 5,400 airports that are out there today. Our nation is tremendously blessed with a number of regional and rural airports. perhaps somewhat underutilized today. We would hope that going forward we would be able to make better use of those so that we would have, in effect, a pure transportation system with hub airports, reliever airports, and small rural airports, all able to operate 24 hours a day regardless of the weather.
John Douglas?
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that we know that the National Air Transportation System for air traffic management was approaching gridlock in 2000. We had several instances where the system had to be vastly slowed down because of the amount of traffic and the amount of weather. So by moving technology into this system, we're going to be able to eventually deal with the weather situation. But the other good news is a lot of the technology that's needed to build a state-of-the-art next-generation air traffic control system has already been deployed in our military. So one of the things that I would urge you to read in that chapter are some of the thinking about how that could be organized on a national basis, but in some sort of a joint program with the Department of Defense, the Department of Transportation, NASA, and other agencies working together, much in the same way that we do to develop our national ballistic missile defense program. We need a national program like the ballistic missile defense program, and a lot of that technology is already there. It's getting it integrated and deployed into a new system. Once that's done, our major airports will be able to take more throughput and deal with weather in a much more efficient way.
At the back. My name is Gopal Ratnam. I'm a reporter with Defense News. Mr. Walker, I wanted to ask you, at the end of the report, there's a note by one of the commissioners, John Hamre, the former Deputy Defense Secretary, and he says that most of the recommendations in the report were too diffuse to be of any particular use, and I think he also says, to quote him, that a lot of the discussions were centered around secondary and tertiary issues. So I wanted to ask you if you thought, what were your comment to that, and also wondering if you thought some of the issues as they relate to particularly defense sector could have been handled differently, or you could have addressed those issues differently.
Well, I think that if you look at the report, that it is clear that we do address a number of things with great specificity, and that you ought to look at the additional views that are at the end of the report as being exactly that. Some of the commissioners wanted to express viewpoints beyond just the things that are in the report. Some people, myself included, had hopes that there would be things in the report that didn't get reflected there. But as I say, this was very much of a consensus process. This was not staff-driven. This was commissioner-driven. And in the end, we achieved unanimity, which was something I wasn't certain we were going to be able to do at the outset. So I put the additional views in that perspective. There are some of the commissioners who wanted this commission to address things with immediacy. There were some of us who wanted to take a longer-term view out into the next, well into the century. So some of us were focused on 30 years out. Some of us were focused on 30 days out. We tried to find a blend of those things, and so I think you find some of that inside the report. And so I was encouraging of people to add additional views because I thought that it was a useful part. But in my view, if you look at what we had to say in our report about the need to meet these challenges inside these core competencies, I think we have been very specific, and I think we have been very clear about how it is this nation needs to go about making some fairly substantial changes in the way we treat the aerospace industry. John?
One thing it's important to point out when you address this issue is most of the additional views were not dissenting views. In other words, they were views that where a single commissioner wanted to make a point that went somewhat beyond what was in the rest of the report. I'll use my own additional views, for example. We know that as we speak, our political system is still very much debating what are the inherently governmental roles in our homeland security situation. And as we speak, the economic condition in our airlines is continuing to deteriorate. This is a national crisis which has a time dimension to it that goes beyond the the Commission's ability to wrap it all up in a final report. And what I tried to say in my additional views is for the President and the Congress to be mindful of this deepening crisis. The things that we have recommended here will be very, very helpful to the airlines and to the manufacturing community which supports the airlines, but we can't, there is a deadline for us. We can't tell you what's going to happen 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now or whatever. So my additional views were to alert the leadership of the country to be in tune with what's going to happen in the next few weeks and months as we look at civil aviation. And if you read Commissioner Hamre's, I believe they were additional comments, not dissenting comments. They really did not take away from the report, but they expressed some of his own views about specificity in other areas. So it's very important to distinguish between dissenting views and additional views.
And to focus on the fact that we're unanimous.
Scott Nance with New Technology Week. I want to ask on 2 points. One is, how specifically will these recommendations and the chapters in the report, how can people in the federal agencies and in Congress then translate this to actual policy changes and budget changes? I mean, how does that translation happen? And my second point is specifically, if you could talk about specifically the research area and particularly elaborate on what needs to happen there and how that can happen to achieve your goals.
Well, there are a couple of answers to that. First of all, for the first time that I think anybody has done this, we asked for a sectoral budget to be put together for aerospace so that everybody can see what the resources are being devoted to aerospace throughout the government. It gives you an overall sense of perspective about both resources and then about priority setting. And the thing that concerns us the most is that when you take a look at that sectoral budget, we are spending substantial amounts of resources, but the priority setting is so diffuse as to be non-existent. And so we are hopeful that federal agencies will take a look at that overall pattern and decide that maybe some interagency action is appropriate simply to make better utilization of resources. Beyond that, you will find in Chapter 5, where we talk about government reforms, that what we attempted to do was to build a horizontal structure within government without challenging the power structures in a way that will immediately cause them to back up. And we do that by suggesting that the various departments and agencies ought to have an Office of Aerospace Development inside them that would basically coordinate the mission of the agency or the department with aerospace. And in so doing, we think that what you do then is create a broad segment of government that has aerospace as an interest. To coordinate that activity, we suggest that inside of OMB that there be a Bureau of Aerospace Management created to see to it that these agency activities are in fact interactive. Beyond that, then, we suggest at the White House that an Aerospace Policy Coordinating Council be put together that would actually act on policy recommendations that would then be transferred throughout the government. But we also recognize that Congress is a part of the problem here, too. And so we suggest in Congress that now that virtually every committee of Congress would now have jurisdiction in the aerospace area because we've created departments in all of their agencies and departments. We suggest that to coordinate that on Capitol Hill, that they put together a joint committee on aerospace modeled after the old Joint Atomic Energy Committee that would have some legislative authority and would also have the ability to coordinate the activities. In no cases are we taking away power from anybody. We're empowering people more, and I think that that's a case that we ultimately will be able to sell.
Yeah, Colonel Tyson with the Journal of Electronic Defense. Electronics, both commercial and defense electronics, are an important part of aerospace. Did you address that industry at all in your report and make any specific recommendations?
Well, in a general way, we did, because I mean, all of this is something that that we are concerned about from the standpoint of aerospace suppliers, and you will find that that we do deal with the supplier question inside the report. But the fact is that we had to spend a lot of time trying to get our arms around. We could have done spectrum management, for example, as a piece of all this too. And wrapping our arms around the topic and making certain we stuck with the core competencies, we do not go into some of these individual areas in great specificity. I think what you will find, though, is that the general recommendations that we make inside the report will fit very well with supplier as well as core industry issues.
Unless you have somebody else who wants to speak. Irv Chapman from Bloomberg Radio. What is your assumption about the airline industry getting out of its current depression, bankruptcy, what have you? What business model do you see for the distant future? And when you say we're losing leadership, do you mean to the Europeans, to Airbus? And also, if I may, the priorities for aerospace, for man, is it still to be manned flight, or where do you see as a group that the United States should be going as far as outer space is concerned?
Well, and some of the other commissioners may want to comment on this too, because you kind of go to the heart of the issue. We think that, for example, that there is a challenge coming from Europe in the commercial aviation realm. No doubt that Airbus is a major challenger to Boeing and to American leadership in that area. But it's not just Europeans. When we travel to Asia, we found there that they are very much looking to build regional jets in the future, and could become a challenge inside the market. We look at the space arena. There's no doubt that Ariane is a challenger to U.S. Commercial space launch industry. So we see the global challenges as being very real. And the Europeans have made very clear in their 2020 report that they have every intention of wresting leadership away from us in commercial aviation. We think America should take that seriously and should make certain that we maintain an ability to compete in these arenas. So the fact is, we went out, we saw the challenges, saw them as being real, and decided that America needed to respond. When we came back and took a look at what it took in order to respond, we were concerned because the industrial base and a lot of the things that are necessary for us to be competitive in the future are being sadly depleted and ignored at the present time.
Yeah, you specifically ask about business models for airlines, and this is something that we looked at and considered, and I think we understood that we don't know what we don't know. If you go back 25 years to just before deregulation, you'll find that no one really knew about hub and spoke systems, didn't know about low-cost carriers, didn't know about regional jets, didn't know about frequent flyer programs, didn't know about fractional ownership programs. When we looked at what the future might look like, what we decided was if we have an air traffic management system that is robust and dynamic enough to accept lots of different aircraft types and lots of different operating models, we would best position ourselves for future growth. So where we focused the future is on building a system that can accommodate the entrepreneurs and give them an opportunity to dream what the future might look like. One of the other things that we looked at and discussed is the fact that we believe that mobility is an inherently good thing. We want to facilitate mobility in the United States. And if you ask any economist, they will tell you that if you tax something heavily, you'll get less of it, not more. And one of our real concerns when we look at the airline industry is that rather than taxing airlines as if they are a national treasure to be promoted, we're actually taxing them more like a sin. We tax them like the tobacco industry or the alcohol industry, and that's a big concern of ours. So our answer to the current airline crisis is build a system that allows flexibility in terms of aircraft and operations and create an environment in which their money can be used to promote growth rather than support the federal government.
Bob?
I think we found a very consistent set of reactions as well to the observation that the United States leadership in aerospace was being challenged. But most folks don't seem to have that feel when we first talk with them, and it's because I think we look back at the 20th century and we remark on the great contributions of aerospace to our economy, to our national security, to science and technology, and to understanding of the universe, and we're relying on that. I think what struck us most is that the world that we live in today is vastly different than the world that created the leadership dimension in the 20th century. When we look at the quality and age of our workforce, in fact, 25% of that workforce is eligible to retire in just 5 or more years. We look at the funds flow into the industry, and it has been very unstable, very cyclical over time. When the industry was broader and more robust, it could tolerate that kind of uncertainty and imbalance, but that's not the industry that exists in the United States today. And as the chairman said, it's of considerable interest to all of us that other nations have made very specific imperatives for focusing on developing an indigenous aerospace capability to assume leadership in the 21st century, and we think that the United States will be vastly weakened if we allow that to occur.
Whip Peters.
You asked a question about did we take a position on manned versus unmanned aircraft, and the answer really is no. I think the role of this commission is to try to facilitate whatever might be the emerging technologies, from air taxis to unmanned vehicles. But I will say in this regard that the most serious challenge to unmanned vehicles like Predator or Global Hawk is flying them through an airspace that it continues to use radio transmissions between pilots in the air and ground controllers. Global Hawk can go where it goes because it goes above the airlanes, goes up to 60,000 feet, and nobody else is up there. Predator cannot, and in fact has to communicate with the ground. So one of the most important things is an automated or a more automated communications, navigation, surveillance system at the heart of an air traffic management system, without which things like unmanned vehicles are going to be very difficult to fly. So I look at this report as looking at core capabilities that we're going to need whatever the future is, and trying to figure out ways in which we can enable whatever future the economy ultimately allows us to have.
John Douglas.
Yeah, there is one part of this report that I would commend to your reading. It has to do with the trade issues that you just raised. We are Europe's biggest market for aerospace products, and they are in turn our biggest markets for aerospace products. So we have a synergistic relationship with Europe. And as many of you know, when you're in Europe and you buy a European product and take delivery of it or take it outside the European Union, you don't have to pay VAT tax on that. We have a law here in the United States very similar to that that says that if we deliver an aerospace product, or in fact any manufactured product outside the United States, a corporation doesn't have to pay income tax on that. It's part of our United States federal income tax statute. The Europeans have taken us to the WTO on that statute and are suing us and have got a large trade issue hanging over our heads. And I think one of the things we felt fairly strongly about, it's treated in that chapter that I draw your attention to, is that's just the kind of action that we would hope that the Europeans would think twice about suing their biggest customer, especially over a tax issue that establishes equilibrium. It doesn't give the United States an advantage. It just equalizes that VAT forgiveness.
Neil Tyson.
I wanted to address the reporter from Bloomberg's question about our future in space and what that might hold. If I may address that briefly. I just want to call to people's attention the fact that the 20th century in America, we were an economic powerhouse, particularly post-Second World War America, primarily because of the extent to which we promoted and developed the fruits of our science and engineering research. And to the extent that that does not continue into the next generation, makes all of us worried that we might just be sort of remembering on the 20th century fondly as a time when America once shined. I'll also add that to have a healthy set of scientists and engineers in society is not only good for the economy, history has shown that it's also crucial for defense. While bravery can win battles, history has shown that it's science and technology that in fact wins wars. And so our future in space, in fact, speaking as a scientist and as an educator, if I want to attract the next generation of aerospace engineers and I stand up in front of the class, it's not going to work if all I can do is tell them, become an aerospace engineer so you can design an airplane that's 10% faster than that of your parents. But if I tell them you will go to Mars in it, in a new kind of ship, and if that is in fact the ambition of the nation, that we can certainly get the best and the brightest of that next generation, fully stoking our society with the discoveries and the findings, economic and scientific, of this generation of scientists and engineers to ensure national security and economic health going forward.
Alan Bierga from the Wichita Eagle. In the report, there's a call to open more military bidding to foreign contractors. Yet at the same time, there's a call for more military support of U.S. aerospace companies. How would you respond to concerns on Capitol Hill or among labor unions about increasing government support to companies that would seem to be giving more jobs to foreign contractors?
Well, we think that there are some places where clearly cooperation with foreign aerospace companies is in fact in our interests, where we have created products that are contributed to by a variety of suppliers, some of them foreign. And we think that some of those arrangements actually result in a healthier industry. They result in our ability to sell product in other places in the world. And it's a case where you're going to have a blend of the two, but it is, I think, a recommendation where we are simply saying that this is a global economy, that there are competencies that we want to utilize inside our own base that are developed in foreign countries, and we also want to maximize our opportunity to sell the final products in those countries. And so what you see reflected in the report is the new world in which we live, in which every day you have to figure out how it is that you are going to interact in a global arena. Bob?
Take one illustration. The F-35 Joint Strike Fighter is now a program that has 9 international participants who have signed up for the system design and development phase of the program, each of whom is contributing money to that design and development, and each of whom has an interest in having industrial partners from those contributing countries participate in a role. The decision model there is on best value, which is exactly what it should be. There is no preferred allocation of work share to any one country or any one participant, but it does act as a more inclusive model to bring forward the best of the global supply chain, and I think that model will likely be one that we'll rely on more rather than less. Joint security requirements, shared responsibilities, aggregating funds in a way that allows affordability of new systems that consequently become interoperable once they're put in place because they're harmonized with regard to requirements at the front end, and creating an open and level playing field for industrial participation on a global basis. That's what we seek for our nation's industrial supply chain participants, and I think it's fair to see other nations seek the same thing.
Otto Kreischer with Copley News Service. Either implicit or implied in a lot of your recommendations are additional federal funding, for the airlines, to some sort of, increased R&D, addition for the airlines. Any estimate of what you're seeking in the way of additional funds from the federal government to make any of these programs work?
Well, first of all, it may be seen as implicit, but I would refer you back to something that I talked about a moment ago, and that is that we began our work by requesting a sectoral budget for a very primary reason, and that is to take a look at the amount of resources that the federal government is already expending in this arena inside of all of these vertical stovepipes where we now allocate the funding. And we do believe that if you had far more in the way of horizontal decision making, that you really prioritize the use of this money, that the fact is that you could get some money invested in the things that we regard as absolutely essential, that is not going there now, but is rather going to lesser kinds of prioritization, or is being expended in many cases in similar ways without any knowledge of what others are doing. And so that's a piece of it. It's not all new money. In other cases, we feel very strongly that in the research area, for example, that investment of new dollars in the research area is absolutely essential. We think that some of the things that are now going on at the Defense Department, where they're increasing the amount of defense research, is the right attitude. We think that probably you need to do some of those things at NASA and NOAA and FAA, particularly in line with a mission needed to accomplish our goals. If you're going to do a new ATM system, you're going to have some investment, for instance, in FAA research that does not now exist. And so we are looking for a prioritization, and we think that that part of our urgent call here is to say that this is an area that has been ignored and now needs to be refunded. Yeah, Heidi?
In addition, in some ways, we're simply asking, in the case of defense, to spend what you say you're going to spend. One of the things that affects this industry is the lack of predictability. And if you look at the delta between prior defense spending plans and then what was actually allocated, there's been a big spread, and that does not contribute to the health of the aerospace industry.
Hi, this is Andrea Shalal-Issa from Reuters, and I have a question about defense consolidation. You talk a lot about how the industry has shrunk dramatically. You've gone from 70 players to just about 5, and we're looking at yet another deal that's under review and should be approved shortly. What are your thoughts about whether there should have been more restraint in terms of approving these consolidations, and what does the future hold? Will there be further consolidations? Will there be Atlantic mergers coming up as this industry is becoming more global?
Bob,
I'll be happy to comment.
Bob Stevens.
I think that when we start by phrasing the issue as to the number of competitors, we're starting too far into the discussion. I think the first question is how much funds will flow with what degree of stability into the market sector, and what's the intent for the use of those funds. And from that funds flow, one can determine whether there's enough competition provided by the industry. To pick a number, irrespective of the funds flow, may well mean, if funding is insufficient, that there are always marginal firms. They are always in ill health. They always act in ways that are very short-term and not necessarily consistent with long-term health of the sector or to the benefit of good utilization of funding that's spent. With regard to international business mergers, I think the preferred solution insofar as we've examined is probably one that looks at opening markets fairly and competitively and giving industry opportunities based on their best value contribution to the to programs of specific interest. So our call to action is to examine all the sources of funding across these vertical and not necessarily well horizontally integrated aspects of government, to make a national commitment for those areas of improvement that are needed. And in fact, that may come with more funding. It would not surprise me that there may be a call for more funding on national security. I don't think the nation has performed particularly well through periods of real stress, either warm or cold wars, at about 3% of GDP, which is about what we've been spending. And then to make sure you get good value for the dollars that are spent on national security. And that comes from a healthy supply chain.
I'd also point out that if you take a look at the totality of the report, throughout the report, we talk about these core competencies because we also believe that what you can begin doing is introducing new players into a changed aerospace environment. For example, if we go at some point to air taxis, you could in fact have manufacturers that are not presently players in aerospace come to the forefront because of the new technologies that they bring to it. That can expand the economic pie inside of aerospace, but you've got to change air traffic management to allow point-to-point service in order for air taxis to become an economic reality. And so some of what we're saying here is that our ability to reach out to new kinds of entrepreneurship is enhanced by doing the things that we speak to in the report. John?
Yeah, I would just comment that when you look at the aerospace industry as a whole, you can kind of look at the military part of it and the civilian part of it. There was a natural process of global consolidation that went on in the industry 10 or 15 years ago, and as we know, we're down to one major manufacturer of large commercial airplanes. At the end of the Cold War, there was a similar consolidation in the defense sector. Now the defense sector is expanding quite rapidly, largest growth since the years of the Reagan administration. And what is more immediately troubling than this idea of whether or not industry will consolidate further or whatever is the fact that we see gaps in the industrial base developing. Bob mentioned some of them in solid boosters. After a certain point, there's no R&D money, no production money, and for the defense part of the solid booster industry. That means that industry will go away if you don't do something to fill it. We're also down to one tactical fighter program now in its research and development, which Bob mentioned, the Joint Strike Fighter. We have to have a program to come after that to maintain those skills here in the United States. So we looked at the flow of the industry a little bit more from the point of view of maintaining its balance and making sure that we have the design teams we need here to meet the long-term needs of the nation than we did this idea of how many companies in each sector.
Okay.
Dave North, Aviation Week. I'm hiding behind the post here. You made many fine recommendations, and I'll go after a question earlier a different way. What is needed to motivate Congress, the administration, and everybody else to work on your recommendations? What's going to take to do it?
Well, in my view, we have done some of that work right now. We have done a lot of consultation, both on Capitol Hill and inside the administration as we have proceeded forward. And I have confidence that there are several of our recommendations that are going to be picked up on fairly quickly. And so I'm hopeful that, that you will see some activity that will answer that question within the next few weeks and the next several months. The Commission is also looking, I will tell you, at a process where we would look at a one-year review of the Commission recommendations to see how much has been done. I'm not aware that other commissions have done that, but we think we have developed a process that is going to permit that to happen. And we're still in the process of trying to work out the details for it to be done, but we have identified funding that would permit it to be done. If we can't get it done in the way that we've outlined, some of our friends on Capitol Hill have indicated that they would be willing to have GAO do that 1 year to 18-month look back at the report. And so we're hoping that we put some discipline into the process that says that these are recommendations that we feel strongly enough about that we think the nation is in need of, and so therefore it is worth looking back after a reasonable period of time to find out whether or not progress is being made.
Barron's Magazine.
I'm sorry. Can I just have you hold for a moment? Tilly Fowler wanted to make a comment.
I just wanted to add to that because this is an active commission. I mean, this is the work of commission members, not staff. And we plan to participate in hearings on the Hill next year once the Congress is back in session. We're already meeting with administration officials, department officials. This is not a report that's going to sit on the shelf. And I think what we need to do, and that's part of the reason we're having this briefing today, I mean, this nation has got to understand that we are at risk as far as our leadership goes in the aerospace industry. If you look at the Vision 2020 that was issued by the European Union a couple of years ago, it got the attention of some members of Congress who created this commission because we don't want to turn around 10 to 18 years from now and say, oh, what we did not do, and we've lost our leadership in the world. So we have got, I was in the workforce part. Tom Buffenbarg and I worked on that. It cuts across all areas. And this is an area that's, if you look back at the Nation at Risk survey that was done in 1981, they were calling for reforms then. And we, again, in this part, if we don't get the attention of our national policymakers and understand the apathy we have in this country right now towards developing scientifically and technologically trained workforce, if we don't get moving and get developing with this, then we're facing what we call in our report, and we believe it, this intellectual and industrial disarmament of this country. I mean, this is really going to be a nation at risk if we don't start taking the steps we need to take to educate and train and attract and retain the best and brightest workforce in the world. And we are woefully dismal in that respect. You read through Chapter 8 on workforce, and it tells you what's happening in our education system throughout this country on math and science in the basic elementary grades. You get up into graduate programs and the engineering levels. We've got a lot of work to do, and we've got to get the attention of the members of Congress as well as in the federal government to start pulling together with a coordinated vision on what we need to do for the aerospace industry.
Barron's Magazine. 3 years ago, the airline industry was choking on its own success, and now it's billions of dollars in the red every quarter. Is there anything you could give to investors to assure them that in some way the boom and bust cycle of this industry, not just airlines, but really the whole aerospace and defense industry, can be brought to some more manageable, steady state?
In fact, I will allow Bob Stevens to speak to that here in a moment because he did quite a lot of work in that. But we believe that that is exactly the direction in which we have to go, is to assure that there are not a series of peaks and valleys that take investors out of the equation. And one of our principal concerns here is that there's not only an investment by government that needs to be made in this industry. Investors on Wall Street need to also take an active interest in this industry again. And we recognize that you're going to have a business model that accommodates the concerns that they've had. But let Bob speak a little bit more to that.
In fact, history doesn't do us a good service here because it has been, as you've described it, at least cyclical in both the commercial civil part of the business as well as in the defense and national security part. But the conditions that existed throughout that period of history that enabled boom and bust cyclicality to not render the industry so poorly well qualified that it can't operate do not exist today. The workforce is down more than 600,000 people through the last consolidation that we mentioned earlier. The average age of the workforce is over 50 years old. The balance sheets of the companies involved are not in particularly good condition, as you well know. The liquidity in the industry tends to be rather narrow now. If we don't stop now this cyclicality as a measure of national will to reinvest in this industry, it may well not be well postured to handle the next wave of cyclicality and the next bust cycle. And I would venture that at least in part, that's what international competitors are betting on when they have government-sponsored, focused programs to concentrate on aerospace leadership in the 21st century. It's my guess that they understand this vulnerability very well, and this nation must also not only understand that vulnerability, but take actions now to repair the situation.
I'm going to take one more question. I will tell you that the commissioners, for the most part, we have one or two exceptions, but several of the commissioners are prepared to stay around here afterwards to answer questions as well. But let me take one last question.
Hi, I'm Allison Burns with Cox Broadcasting, working for WFTV from Orlando, Florida today. If the committee's recommendations are enacted, how will this impact NASA specifically? And also, would Dr. Aldrin please comment?
From my standpoint, I believe that what we will do is increase the prioritization of some of the NASA programs in both aeronautics and space. With specific reference to the Kennedy Space Center, there are some operational issues that we raise, both in terms of having the Air Force Base and NASA work together in a common spaceport effort. There are also recommendations, not recommendations, but conclusions in here that would indicate that we think that NASA should more and more look toward either privatization or municipalization of some of their facilities in order to deal with operational cost issues. Buzz?
From Florida, I really appreciate the tone of your question. Going back 30 or 40 years ago, a few of us came along as fighter pilots and were treated to a wonderful opportunity and experience, and we'll be ever thankful to everyone who was associated with that. As these more recent years came along, I was given an opportunity to participate in this commission. And as I think you can see, it's an extremely varied and distinguished and highly talented group of people from management, from industry, from government. and it's been a real treat for me to be a part of this. The space effort is in the minority, as you may see in this, and this commission is really dedicated to the aerospace industry. Of course, the directions that our government Department of Defense goes in space directions and that NASA goes have a tremendous impact on the health of the aerospace industry. I think when the commission was formed, there were a set of entirely different conditions than maybe exist today. The nation is at war with terror. We are facing other challenges. We've had a new administration take in at NASA and look at the conditions of the human spaceflight and some of the expenditures and financial situations, and it's in a sense of transition right now, as is our launch business in the expendable rockets. We are introducing 2 new expendable rocket systems to replace the old standbys that we've had for a long time. And we've made several efforts in the past to try and upgrade and bring together the Defense Department and NASA. And I think because of the reevaluation that NASA is going through now with regard to the space shuttle program and its upgrades, how long it's going to be flown, and the status of the space station, and what is needed to upgrade it to a full complement of crew, the introduction of a space plane, all of these things were frankly incompatible with some of the objectives that were set out in the Space Launch Initiative. So I think the 03 budget is being amended, and what we'll see coming up in the future will also be a significant change. Just how that is all going to play out, we didn't quite have the total coverage in the commission to cover all the details of that, but I think in general, the imperatives that we're pointing out of how the workforce needs inspiration, the educational system needs that. I would like to sit up here along with Neil and say we're going to send a balanced program of science, robotic missions, and human missions to the outer planets or to Mars or back to the moon. We'd like to be able to say that. But I don't think the national condition really is ripe for that at this time. I think what we've tried to do is to point out the needs, and they are rather stringent needs for the aerospace industry to make some changes. There were a few things that were added in the recommendations that have to do with something that I've been working on for a while, and that has to do with public space travel. The Russians have pointed the way toward the enthusiasm that wealthy people have, and I think the entertainment industry is looking to try and figure out how they can take advantage of the high visibility of space travel, and I think that NASA is beginning to see the benefits that could come from an industry of public space travel that requires the flight rate that will justify the reusability that we'd like to put into our rocket systems, and that reusability will increase the reliability. So we may at one hand have an overcapacity of launch, but I think on the other hand we have an overcapacity of willing space travelers, and it's just very difficult to bring those two together under the present conditions. I think that we've addressed a significant coverage of these problems and pointed the way towards some government changes that can be made that'll improve our abilities in the space business.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your being here today.
Hi, how are you? Okay. Thank you.